Hello, and welcome to the Roll Wise podcast, your show where we talk about things related to tabletop RPGs and things adjacent to that. And in this case, we're going to be talking about character knowledge. Like, what does your character know? Should they know this thing that they've stumbled upon in this ancient crypt? Or should it be a mystery for them to unravel? Lots of good conversation about this because I feel like this is especially interesting for our group to be talking about because we're going to be exploring or we're going to be exploring Cosmere either before or after this episode post. We'll find out. But we'll be exploring Cosmere, and none of us really have a lot of knowledge about the Cosmere universe. And so when we look at, them exploring Cosmere, they're going to be going through from a very uninitiated standpoint. And so for them, they're going to have, we're going to have to find out what their character would know versus what they themselves know, which is
Right.
at this point close to nothing. Like, so at least, and it's not a unique problem to Cosmere, but obviously the first time you introduce yourself to a setting, a lot to learn. So let's get into it. So first of all,
so here's kind of an example within the Cosmere space for us. So I know what a spren is. Spren? Did I say it? Did I even say it right?
I know what a spread is. He confidently says wrong.
Spread is yeah. So I know what that is. Like, is that common knowledge within the world of Cosmere? Like, I have no idea. Okay, so that's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, it seems as though and this is where it's kind of interesting, is that it seems as though there's the knowledge that's kind of established within the world, and then there's like what Sanderson appears to be doing with he's kind of subverting the common knowledge for his own storytelling devices.
Right.
And I'm not going to say that I can elaborate on that at all. I'm only going based off of wiki reading and shit like that. So don't expect me to be like, well, in anticipation for this Cosmere, I happen to read 5 several thousand page books just to prep for this. No, I didn't. I actually specifically decided to stop reading any of Sanderson's work until after we do this Cosmere thing, because I really wanted to experience it for the first time, just like you guys did, as an outsider looking in. So, I did research some of this stuff just so that I at least had some context clues, and I'll have of course, my opinions about the one shot after the fact. But
yeah, I was just trying to use that as an example, as like, there's terms that you know or you hear that, like, as a player I might know, but like my character might not know, or there's things that are going to come up that like I don't know at all, and then we have to kind of on the fly decide, is that something my character would know, or is it something I should roll for, or just those sort of character knowledge things, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So just before we proceed too far, of course, if you like this kind of conversation and you want to know us that we're doing a good job, hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button if you're a new person to the channel. We really appreciate everybody stopping by and giving us a listen. But also, of course, if you have your own experiences dealing with character knowledge, like what do they know in the game, you're a well-studied person on the Forgotten Realms versus what your character would know, et cetera, et cetera. Let us know your stories. Where has it come in? Where has it become weird? Where has it been fun? How have you experienced that? So I think the first thing is that we all know what player knowledge is, and we all know what character knowledge is, and we all know when people start being players getting knowledge that they're not supposed to have is metagaming. But the question is that as a DM, how do you make it a smooth game when your players know absolutely jack and shit about the world, and you have a fun experience kind of both having them pretend like they know what they're doing, but also revealing it to them at the same time. So it's interesting. So Jeff, where do you think that kind of comes in? Because I mean, we've recently played a lot of games that have had, you've either been unfamiliar with, such as like Alkenstar or in Fabula Ultima. Where do you think that lands?
Yeah, it comes up a lot, like in little situations, like when NPC might be describing like how to get to somewhere, and they're like, well, you head towards Mount Doom, and when the road forks, you take the left fork. Do I know what Mount Doom is? Like, where I'm from, is it famous? Is it a famous enough landmark that knowledge would have traveled to wherever I was? Because as a character, I honestly don't know. You know what I mean? I can look at a map if a map's been provided, right? But would I have access to a map? That kind of stuff. it comes up in small, subtle ways all the time. Just a lot of times in descriptive text and things like that. Because I know we ask a lot. Would my character know that? Is that something they teach in school? You know, this is the mayor of Alkenstar, Mayor Scuttlebutt.
Yeah.
Would I know if I didn't grow up here?
Alkenstar worked great because we had all just arrived there. Like, so we knew like general things about Alkenstar, like it was split in two and that stuff. Like we knew all that, which was fine, but we had no reason to know anything else about Alkenstar. So that worked as a plot device great in the Pathfinder game, because when we were asking stupid questions and people were looking at us like we're stupid, we could all be like, "Oh,
we're from out of town.
We're from out of town. Yeah, we're new. We're new in town. We're making an apple orchard vineyard thing.
Cidery. We have a cidery.
Cidery.
Yeah. That's an inside joke, everybody. I'll explain it some other day. Yeah, like we all had, like, so that worked great. It's very much like Jeff's example is very, very good. Like, oh yeah, you head towards Mount Doom or whatever. Like, where is that? Like, and
is it really a bad place? Because Mount Doom is a very ominous sounding.
Is this just a nickname?
The name sounds rough. Yeah.
Is this just a nickname or yeah? And the thing is like, and I think that's a good example, because like, if you say that, a player immediately knows what that is potentially, but like the character might not. And like sometimes in that instance, the player's just gonna be like, okay, and then just like not even like ask more questions because they won't think about it. So yeah, like I think that's a really good example.
Yeah. And it's always interesting to me too, because there's like a few different approaches that I think people I've seen, you know, and I've read about, and they go about it. And I've even used some myself, you know, like, is this something your character would know? It actually starts to become this question like, okay, well, like, let's establish like why you may know it, you know, like, is there a justification with your character? Like, is there a personal history that you've described with your character, like, as to why they would know that? Or is there like or do they have a high enough stat? Like, for example, you know, and I think it's always interesting to use like knowledge-based skills, because obviously if it's a super secret arcane like mystery, you know, a person with a 6 intelligence is probably going to be like, do I know anything about that? No, not really. It's never come up.
No, boy, you never went to school. You have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, well, and this is one reason why I like modern games, because I never have to fill those gaps. Like, like people know where things are in the United States if they're from there. Like,
well, yeah, no, think about how much general information we have about our state or our country or even the world in general, right? We have a lot because we were taught a lot of weird stuff in school, or we watch programs, or we consume media. You learn some stuff, and yes, in a fantasy setting, you don't have access to as much media, but there's still, every fantasy setting has travelers that stop at the inn and tell tales, and you know what I mean? Whether they're true or not, that's a whole nother story, but there's access to knowledge and information that you could possibly like, do I know where Mount Doom is? No, but I've heard people talk about it. Right. It was always in hushed tones with pale face, you know, like,
right.
Don't go to Mount Doom, you know.
And that's kind of where I guess that's kind of where this question for me came from, is because both as a player and as a GM, like, I think about modern games and like there's just things that it's like, oh no, yeah, you know that, so of course your character would know that. Where's Washington DC? Yeah, you know that, you know, whatever. But like for fantasy games, there's almost no frame of reference for that. Like, there's no, like, how much would a common man know? And like, in one of the games that brought this up is Symbaroum. There's a YouTube channel that just basically reads the entire background of the Symbaroum book. It's really great. It's really educational. But it's like, even as a player, if I listen to all that, I can't say that a player would know everything that is indicating. And there's some things in there that the GM might make up that he like doesn't know, and I wouldn't expect players to know that, but like, it's just an interesting thing to me that like, how do you educate them to basic stuff, like that we take for granted in the modern world, that we know about our surroundings, that you have no real frame of reference. Like, one of the things that comes up a lot in my discussion with some of my other friends is like, how common is magic? Like, because that completely changes a world. Like, when you have a cantrip that just makes things clean, like that seems small. Like that's it sounds small, but like that's a huge thing. Like, could you imagine if you just had the ability to be like, oh, yep, all my clothes are clean. I don't have to do laundry ever. They're just clean. Like that's a huge, and like,
or society eradicates disease, no
right,
repercussions
yeah.
because it's you've created a sanitary environment. We can commit surgery and don't have to wash hands and all these kind of things.
Right, like it's such a little, like it seems like such a little thing, but it has such a sweeping impact. And this comes down to like the realism of building your world. Like what, like so, like do people know? Like, does everyone know that magic exists? Does like a commoner? Like even in Forgotten Realms, it's like, does a commoner in the middle of nowhere know that a couple 500 miles away, a wizard's throwing fireballs at something?
Well, it's
probably not. Potentially, he's heard stories, but whether or not he believes it might be, like
that's true.
like.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's so first of all, I think that's something that it's a great question to have when you're explaining your setting and everything like that in session 0. Like I think you have to have that type of conversation up front, because even if you assume that heroic people are kind of like one step above and well-traveled and a knowledge about these kind of more obscure topics, because for example, it was interesting in Vaesen because obviously everyone else thinks that spirits and the Vaesen are a bunch of hokum, like weird folklore stories that have no place in modern society, right? But then you obviously, each of you have a reason to believe because you've seen the Vaesen or you've experienced the Vaesen and everything like that, and so now you're the weird ones. But then you have to but now you have to go through this process of understanding more about each Vaesen, because you're even though your characters are aware of them, you don't know them. And so it becomes these interesting little pieces. And I think that in some games it's a little easier to do than others, because if you, as a DM, you can always gate something behind a roll, right? You can go, this is maybe not specialized knowledge, because I think the Age of Worms really cemented this for me. A DC 5 roll is silly, in my opinion. I was going to say something stronger, but silly seems the right word to say. Oh, you have to roll your knowledge to know this. I rolled a 3. Sorry, you don't know something very common.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. Yeah, and I guess that's exactly one of the instances that I'm talking about. Like, there's definitely been. Did that happen to me in the Age of Worms game, and that's why this bubble?
No. I took all of those DC 5. Like, I think there was one roll that was a DC 0 or something. I was like, what the hell is a DC 0? If they roll a 1, they just like turn oblivious. Like, everybody on the planet knows this except you.
You get a nosebleed and you pass out. You wake up.
You were thinking too hard again.
You wake up a little while later with no memory of what happened. Well, you now have you've gained anti-knowledge. You now know less than you knew before you made that dice roll.
I forgot my memories. Oh no. Why am I here? I mean,
what are memories?
Yeah, exactly. I forgot things. I don't know what I forgot because I don't remember them anymore.
Yeah. So I think that there's like, you can gate some things behind a check if you're not sure a character would know it, especially at lower levels and stuff like that where your character isn't really established. I feel it's fair to say, okay, well, this is a magical. This is a specialized thing, and you say, okay, well, your character may have run across it, but let's roll some dice to see how likely that is. I mean, it does suck if you never succeed in that skill, even though you're supposed to be trained. Like if Jeff never succeeded in an arcane roll in DC 20, that would be feel bads, man. But just has a shitty teacher, I guess.
We were focused on other topics.
Yeah, sometimes it sucks when you're successful and stuff and you're not trained in either. But we'll move on past that. But yeah, and then it's just determining like what is common knowledge and what isn't. And I think that's also difficult for me as a GM sometimes, is in those high fantasy situations. Like, well, would this be common knowledge that owlbears eat human beings? Like, would that be common knowledge? Or do I think they're herbivores? Like are owlbears friendly? I don't know. Does everybody know that, or would I know that? Like,
is he cute? I go up to try to pet him.
Oh, I bet baby owlbears are really cute.
How much of this kind of stuff do you you guys who have run a lot of different systems, like in a session 0, how much about the world do you guys try to cover in session 0, if at all?
I think it depends on the world. But if
Okay.
like you guys don't know anything about the world, I mean, if we just go back to Vason, I mean, I laid the groundwork as to explaining your at least the role and your role within it. Without, I don't want to do the whole stranger in a strange land kind of thing. Like you at least have a framework and
Well,
background.
right, but Vason's a little bit easier because yes, it's what 1900s, turn of the century,
Yeah,
1900s.
but
But we
but
have a
it's
frame of reference for that.
we do, but it's still they specifically tell you that a lot of the bad things that were happening about that time, we took those out. So you still have to like set the record straight as to certain little things, and then of course with
Right, but like you still know if you walk into a bar, people are going to be selling alcohol. Like
Mhm.
like that stuff. Whereas in like fantasy settings, it's like no, they're serving wild honey dream juice. Like just shit like that.
Yeah, they
Like
serve
it's
tea
like
here. You're in a dry
yeah,
county.
it's tea. Like well, there's some frame of reference. And I think you're right. I think like telling them all as much as you
well,
I struggle with deciding what's too much information or what's enough. Like what's general knowledge, but not this place was blessed by the gods sort of stuff.
well, but I think it's an interesting thing to tell a small story. Like there's two ways I think you can approach this to really introduce people to the world. The first way is you can have a prologue adventure. You can just introduce them by just having them experience a microcosm of the adventure through a small tiny bit. Like so you just experience a day in the life of your character, right? I think that's a really easy way for you to get some introduction to it. Otherwise, I think you can tell just a small story. And I mean, I hate to lean on World of Warcraft about this, but there's like every time you create a character, you literally get just the synopsis of the macrocosm of the world around you, but not so big that you're like, oh gosh, I have too much to deal with. It's just like as an undead or as a forsaken, you arise, new to this world, but knowing that you have to go join the horde kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Like they kind of just give you a short, sweet, interesting tidbit. So not so much that you have like too much, but not so little that you're like,
Yeah, because
why
I
the
think as a GM, your first instinct is to give too much information.
oh 100%. Like you're just like, okay, guys, this is a homebrew world. Are you ready for this? And
Yeah, and
then
it's so cool.
like you literally look over at your players and they've decomposed into skeletons just sitting in the chair like 10 days later kind of thing. But I think that if you don't want to do it all your own though, what do you guys think about basically putting it on the players to justify why they may know something? What do you think about that approach?
I kind of like that. I mean, unless you know that it's something hyper specific, right? That would require advanced training or research or schooling or something, right? Or specific interaction. Unless I think the players, telling you what their character's backstory is, where they've trained, what they've done, where they've traveled. I think trying to come up with a justification, I think works for a lot of things. It's probably just as annoying for you to turn it around on them for the 40th time in the session as it is for you when they ask for the 40th time. But
Oh,
I
I
think
I don't know.
I think that's fine if they can think up a reason why they would know that. But like, for example, back to Cosmere, if you ask me something and you go, why do you think you know that information? I might not know enough about the world to give you a justification.
well,
Okay.
but
That's a
you
good
could,
point.
but you could still look at your. I mean, and this is where it becomes like a weird game. It's just like, well, if I say, hey, what about your character, might give you a better understanding of religion, and just to use Cosmere as the example, and if your character has a skill, the hell is the word I'm looking for? Because on the pre-gens, you have your various skills and everything like that. So you look at your character and you say, okay, well, one of the skills is survival, right? But I don't have any ticks in it. So I have a weak justification that I'm able to present. And I think that as a player, you can do that. But then I think if you're going to play that game, I would rather just have a difficulty check, if that makes
Right.
sense,
Like,
rather than
so,
going back and forth on a like and getting your opinion. Because if I say, why would you know that? Oh, your reason sucks.
well, yeah. But like using survival as an example, like It would be like you come to a situation where it's like, well, the only water in the area is pond water. It's like, does my character know enough to know, without any survival skill, does he know enough to boil the water so he doesn't get sick? Like those are the kind of instances that I'm kind of curious. It's like because for us in this is why I like modern games sometimes, because for us it's like, oh yeah, you would know that. Like you would know not to drink,
Don't just drink the stagnant.
Don't just put your face in the stagnant water and slurp it down.
That's not necessarily true, as was proven. Because as fans of Alone, if there's a Alone fan club out there, please let us know in the comments. We watched a lot of that show.
That guy was an idiot. Well, I watched that show partially for role-playing game purposes. Like, it gives you ideas about what survival instances in like a medieval setting would be, where people have nothing. That was one of the reasons. Weirdly enough, that was one of the reasons that drew me to the show.
But it's interesting because you say like, well, in modern day we know to boil the water, and that one guy was just like, I'm gonna risk it.
But yeah, he knew he should though.
Yeah, he admitted it as he was having accidents in a sleeping bag. We'll just say that.
Yeah, he knew he had made a bad choice.
He's like, oh, I got bubble gut.
This might be worse than the last time I poisoned myself with water.
Yeah, and like my character might know next time that he should probably boil the water.
Sometimes the consequences are the best lesson. I mean, really, that's how you really develop that deep knowledge on the thing.
Just life's the best teacher. We can agree on, assuming you survive.
It's common knowledge stuff that I think is interesting in fantasy, especially in fantasy settings, where it's like, what's common knowledge, knowing that it's limited by travel. Like the only way you hear about things outside of your little town is probably by having visitors. Which that's a little bit covered by the adventurers because they're supposed to be pretty well traveled. So that I think that's pretty okay. It's just one of those interesting things where it's I guess I do like putting it back on the player. Like if a player can say, "Oh, I did this, so I know this," I think that's fine. And I think that's good. I just, like I said, I have been in instances where it's like, I don't know enough about the world to know what I would have learned in school, sort of situation. Like, and I just, like I said, the part of this conversation is how kind of we as a group deal with that.
So I guess, do you guys remember Daggerheart used like experiences and stuff like that to kind of give you a broad strokes by which your character would know general things? What do you think about that versus like the specificity behind like an actual skill set you get with like listy games, kind of like Call of Cthulhu and stuff, where you have like 50 different skills?
Oh, well, see, that's the part that I'm struggling with. I think your skills give you an idea of 100% what your character does know. Like in Call of Cthulhu, for example, if you know criminal forensics, and I might not even make you have a roll on criminal forensics, but like you're still going to have general knowledge stuff just by sake of having like going through high school and living life and stuff like that. And those are more the instances that I'm in a high fantasy setting that I personally struggle with, is like just and I mean, I guess the honest answer is just make them up. If you're the GM, make it up, or have the player make it up. Like, well, would he know that? Sure, you know that now. And I guess if you're a GM, like, know enough about your world to be able to answer those questions, because the players, we've talked about this before, the players are probably not going to do the research to come up to the level of some of the general knowledge that you're looking for. So just, I guess, be ready for, as a GM, you're going to have to probably take a little bit of a crunch on that and say, oh yeah, I think this is the fact that you would know. And I think one of the games that I'm thinking of recently that happened was there's something about like either a conflict or something about the city guard. And it was like, well, this sounds like a thing that happened. That was kind of a big deal. Would we know that? And then we kind of came down to the situation where it was like, yes, you would know that, but then you had to explain it or something like that. And it seemed, or it didn't get explained very well or something. I don't remember, but like, it seemed like something we should know. I don't remember if it was your game or not. But it just seemed weirdly vague, or something that we would know that we didn't. And those are the situations I'm talking about. But like I said, I think just making it up is probably the real answer.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's plenty of ways for you to approach it. I mean, if you look at rolling the dice to set it behind a difficulty number, just don't set it at 5. That's silly. If you feel like it tells a more interesting story and makes the characters more competent to just know certain things, I think you're justified in just telling them if you feel like it tells a better story. Because I don't know about you guys, but I don't feel like having you roll for every knowledge check seems that interesting.
Definitely not. Definitely
You know,
not.
and then you end up with the most hodgepodge, weirdest understanding of the world ever. So like the Age of Worms is interesting because there's an entire branch of knowledge that's kind of like hidden behind, gated behind like checks and everything like that. But it's something you uncover naturally through, reading books and exploring ruins. You know what I'm saying? Like, so there's a lot of different ways to get to it, and that's the kind of stuff.
That's how your characters learn. They go to the library.
They can in other games, just not my games because I hate libraries. But it's not. I don't think it's out of bounds to have characters that have a research skill, have the moment to shine by going to the Royal Library or having that be a session to find out that information academically, as opposed to like I go to the bar and wait for somebody to tell me the theorem of Pythagoras.
Yeah, I think the nature of my question isn't like skill check knowledge. Like I think that's pretty obvious. It's general. It's more general knowledge. Like
yeah. If I grew up on a farm and had never been across the creek that borders the property, would I really know what the capital of the country that I live in is?
Right. Yeah.
If my parents had never been there, would they know? Like, like
it's more that type of stuff and how we deal with it.
I know that the country's actually at war, but nobody's been levied out of my county.
Yeah,
and you know what I mean?
And I think that's the kind of stuff that as a DM you just feed to the players.
Yeah,
you basically just, oh, they've asked a good question. Here's the answer to that question that helps them better define the world in your opinion.
Yeah, and I think to my kind of the point that I was trying to make is like you have to know well enough, because I think sometimes it's common knowledge, and I've done this before in games. There's things that would probably be common knowledge that I've made them roll for before, and again, of course, they failed, and it seemed weird that they didn't know that.
Yeah,
and so that's the thing that you need to. I guess that's the crux of the situation is make sure you understand the difference between what would be common knowledge in your world versus like skilled knowledge, because you are going to run into those situations where it's like, not skilled knowledge. I was going to use milking a cow as an example, but that's a skilled knowledge because I would know how to do that.
I hear there's milk that comes out of this thing somewhere.
It's this general area. That's a bull. That's a bull.
You realize that things can be milked,
right?
Yeah. But you don't know the specifics enough to do it, right?
Yeah, like I guess that would be the thing. Is like, where do you get milk? Would be the question. I wouldn't be like roll dice for that. Like, and I feel like there's been instances where I know
nuts.
that I've done
you
that.
get them from various nuts and berries,
almonds and berries. And I feel like I've done that before, and then it was like weird. I probably should have just told them that. I think that's the thing. It's like I think that's my advice, and you please chime in, Mike. But like, just try and know what would be common knowledge versus like one really common one that's come up in one of my other friends' games is magic. How common is magic? Does the common farmer know that magic exists for real? Like, he's heard stories probably, but has he ever seen a wizard? Has he ever talked to a wizard or somebody that could do spells? Because that's the thing that changes the context of your world quite a bit. And it seems and like in most adventuring parties it seems small.
I think that's dead. I think that's pretty much the way that I would handle it, is that if I want you to know it, I just tell you. And especially if you're asking the right questions. I think that the thing is as a player, you can't expect to be given all the knowledge you need up front. So you have to ask questions. You have to interrogate.
We can't just go on fishing expeditions to get extra information we weren't supposed to have.
Well, you can try, and obviously that stuff is going to be either skill gated or just a hard no. But if you don't interrogate the setting at all, it's hard for me as the DM to just lore dump you stuff that is relevant, because it's not going to be contextually okay. Like,
nobody's going to remember, and you're going to get the questions anyhow.
Yeah.
So I think I think that's a good piece of advice, because you don't mean necessarily even in character. You mean ask out of character questions about the setting. I think that's the best. I think that's fantastic advice. Okay. Encourage your players to ask questions out of character to understand the world. because that way your character isn't making some dumb choice that's not that's common knowledge that is going to feel weird at some point. You can educate yourself as the game happens, or if you're a good good person playing in a game, feel free to do a little bit of research. Read the blurb that your GM sends, or engage in that session 0 and ask those questions. So
yeah, and I think it's been rather interesting. I think Dragon Bay has been a really good example of it because the setting is so minimally defined that we both get to decide what's happening with said experience kind of at the moment when it becomes necessary to define it. And I don't think every game plays like this. I think if you're playing in Forgotten Realms, where Tribor is, where Waterdeep is, the city, like somebody, if they really wanted to metagame, they could really go in and get one of the old City of Waterdeep boxes, and they can know 7,000 locations or whatever it was published in that, and then you can school the DM on their lack of knowledge of the city or some crap. But in general, like Dragon Bay is really interesting because like when we talk about Jeff's knightly order, I go, okay, well, Jeff, what was important to your order to be a knight? Like how did that play out, and do you feel like you interacted with these other knightly orders at all? And yeah, I think I did. Okay, well then let's add that to the character. And as opposed to Brent's language skill debacle, I think it's interesting to
success. You mean
he's listened to so many conversations in other languages.
I obviously,
especially old dead languages. People speak anymore.
I obviously will someday be a Wolfen shaman who knows about languages that he's never heard before. Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I think I really do think the problem comes in. I think this knowledge gap comes in with discovered worlds like Forgotten Realms, like the Cosmere setting, where people have a lot of information and there seems to be a right or wrong answer. Games like Fabula Ultima, where you're creating your own world, or games like Dragonblade, where it's like, oh, make your knightly order and stuff like that. Like, I think those are a little bit easier because essentially that fiction is what you're writing as you go. Looser settings, I think, are better for this. Or you can do what I do and just play modern games where people just know stuff, and you're good.
That's fair. So I think that's character knowledge. An interesting topic to have, especially when you're going into a game a setting as unfamiliar as Cosmere is to us. We'll see exactly if we can practice what we preach. So follow us on Mondays where we play games live, and you can actually interact with us as we play. We're not so focused on the game that we will ignore chats. We actually like to chat with people as we play. It's kind of fun. But check us out 8:30 Pacific on Mondays. Usually, sometimes we take a break. We usually post if we don't. But come check us out. Say hello. All that jazz. And if you guys want to chat with us outside of YouTube, Jeff, how would they do that?
You can just open up your Facebook Threads or Twitter app and search for @Rollwise. You can also email us, rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
And as always, thank you for hanging out with us, having a conversation with us about character knowledge. And roll well, roll wise, and be safe out there, everybody.
Thank you.